Welcome to the 10X Blueprint Podcast, your guide to unlocking 10X growth through AI, AR, and Web3. Join Simone Knight, billion-dollar media strategist and founder of Brandiverse Marketing, for discussions with industry leaders about harnessing the power of tomorrow's technologies today. Let's step into the Brandiverse.
The information I'm presenting is my view and does not in any way represent the views of INTERPOL.
Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of the 10X Blueprint Podcast. My name is Simone Knight, and I am your host. Today, we're having a fantastic conversation, which might be a little bit unexpected for my guests. We're talking about e-waste. We're talking today about our beautiful garbage. And today, my special guest is Magda Theodate. Magda is Assistant Director of Procurement, Contracts, Travel, Missions, and Event with the International Police, that is Interpol. So she is joining us, and we'll be talking about sustainability today. We'll be talking about our beautiful garbage and e-waste. Let me first introduce Magda, and then we will go through her fantastic record. Magda, how are you doing today? Nice to have you on the 10X Blueprint Podcast.
Hi, Simone. So good to see you. Thank you.
It's fantastic because today we're talking about something a little bit different. We're talking about e-waste and our beautiful garbage, right? And so I want to give a little bit of background about you and what you've been doing. So prior to joining Interpol, you were, again, Director of Procurement Contracts with Global Executive Trade Consulting Limited, a Belize and Florida-based consulting firm. Before that, you were working in private practice and commercial trade as a commercial trade lawyer. You were leading procurement roles with the Inter-American Development Bank in D.C. and the Caribbean. These are some organizations that, to be honest with you, I had never heard of before. So I want to hear a little bit more about that. Your background is that you have a Juris Doctor degree in U.S. Common Law from American University. You have been in procurement and international development and law for a long, long time. And so I want to understand more about how you became an evangelist for e-waste and sustainability. So please give us a little bit more about your background and where you're coming from.
Thank you so much, Simone. Really grateful to be here. I'm thrilled to be a part of this podcast and to share my experience on sustainability and sustainable waste management, particularly in today's tech revolution. How did I get here, and what are all these international organizations? Well, they are international governmental organizations. I have always been one who believed that government has a responsibility to its citizens, not just because we pay taxes, but because we have elected officials that represent us, and we need governance in order to have a properly functioning society. So I believe government has to keep certain promises that it makes to its citizens, and international governmental organizations allow those promises to become reality on a global stage. So the entities that you've mentioned, such as the Inter-American Development Bank, focuses on financing social and economic development in the Americas. The World Bank focuses on financing social and economic development. And I have always worked in that area because that's what I really believe in. And certainly Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization, does the same, but specifically on fighting crime globally.
Fantastic. Now, as I said, some people who are so used to this podcast being very tech focused might be wondering, why are we talking about our beautiful garbage? Why are we talking about environmental impact and waste? And the reason, folks, is because of e-waste. Because as we grow in our usage of technology like artificial intelligence and all of the required computing capacity and space and energy required, we have to think about the end of cycle of some of these devices, right? We have to think about from birth to death, how do we put these tech things to bed without impacting the environment even worse than it already has been right now? So that's why we have Magda on today's podcast. And so, Magda, you're a thought leader in global trade, international affairs, public procurement. As I said, you've been an environmental evangelist, a sustainability evangelist for a long time. And so the question is, how do we manage waste in sustainable ways, right? How do we do this in this new tech revolution? So that we're going to talk a lot about that today. And just to kick off the conversation, I want to share a story about a project that I worked on many years ago, which I think really goes to the point of today's conversation. I was decommissioning a facility many years ago, and this facility had about 120 people that were working there. And we had to move all of these people out and we had to completely empty the facility, which had been rented for about 20 years. So imagine 20 years of people working in a space. Think about all the documents, the furniture, the technology equipment, the servers, the things that were in storage. We had to do everything. And at the end of the day, we had to relocate these people, take everything out. It took a few months to get this done, and seven dump trucks of old equipment, of furniture, of rugs, of all of these things. I could not believe what was happening. Now, we did bring things to Iron Mountain for storage that were important. We also brought in shredding machines to shred the things that we didn't need. Then we also went and brought in a waste management company to help us to recycle certain equipment that could be recycled. But at the end of the day, we still threw out a lot of stuff. Where did those things go? What happened to those things? They ended up in landfills. How can we do better? What are your thoughts on that, Magda?
Well, Simone, that was a story that many of us probably have had to deal with at some point in our lives or will have to deal with, particularly in the professional world. I think that addressing e-waste in particular, the e-waste challenge, requires a real collaborative effort, primarily, I would say, between government, business, and consumers. And while individuals may feel a little overwhelmed, I believe that even small actions like repairing a device before replacing it, or passing it down to your younger sibling for a few years, maybe researching responsible recycling options, or even supporting businesses committed to sustainability, I think all of those things make a difference. But we've got to act collectively to create a more sustainable future for the tech revolution. So that, I hope, is what we're going to talk about next.
Absolutely. When I think about this, how many of us have an old cell phone, right? Old laptops, old electronics at our homes. I know I do, right? So some of us are able to take them to places like Best Buy to recycle, and some of us just have them stored in a cabinet, right? You have that old laptop. So let's talk about what people should be doing when they're ready to remove some of these things from their homes and go forward. So what are your thoughts there? What happens when we throw them out, and what should we be doing?
Thank you, Simone. Those are great questions. How many people have old cell phones, laptops, or other electronics at home that they just don't know what to do with, right? What about unused clothing and accessories? We all have that one drawer, the one that seems to have everything old in it, where old phones go to die or to retire, maybe a digital camera from like who even knows when, and a million charging cables. Well, it turns out we're kind of sitting on a problem way bigger than just clutter. It's like really sitting on a treasure chest. All those discarded gadgets, well, guess what? They're full of valuable resources. It's not like we're actually throwing away treasure in a way, right? We're talking about gold, copper, even those rare earth elements like lithium. These things are used to make the latest gadgets, and the latest and greatest tech majoritarily comes from Mother Earth. So many people are interested in environmental and social sustainability these days, but just wanting to be eco-friendly doesn't magically make that mountain of old tech disappear, right? When you want to talk about impact, I think the first step is really realizing how big is the issue really? Your audience may be asking, is this really a problem? I'm doing my part to be more sustainable. You're doing your part. My neighbors are doing their part. Isn't that enough?
I don't know that it's enough. When I think about recently, for instance, we have a huge tech company, multi-billion-dollar global tech company that literally just bought a decommissioned nuclear energy facility. Now, they didn't buy it because they're going into nuclear energy. They bought it for the space. And they have also bought it because it's very well protected from natural disasters and so forth because of just the nature of that business. So it's great that they're reutilizing the space and they're really upscaling it, which is amazing. But at the same time, think about the fact that they needed that much space for the servers. This was necessary when you're looking at bringing in technologies like AI and even quantum computing, which is coming in the future, all of the space necessary to power this tech revolution. It requires physical land space, and it requires a lot of energy, and it requires a lot of rare earth metals, a lot of equipment, and things that will eventually have an end of life, right? So, what is the environmental impact of this type of tech waste? I know that there was a Chinese retail company, e-commerce company that got in big trouble because people were saying that they are perpetuating a lot of waste just in their packaging of clear plastic bags that they use to send their clothes to people that have purchased them. And a lot of
Right.
these clothes are considered more like one-time use, right? And so
Right.
people are throwing these things away. And so they got a lot of negative press as a brand as a result
Right.
of their lack of sensitivity to retail waste. So, what is the economic and environmental impact of some of these things?
I think those are great questions. And when we want to talk about the scale of the problem, we can start with respected institutions such as the United Nations. The UN estimates that the world is generating or will generate by 2030 around 75 million metric tons of e waste, with
Wow.
only 20% of that e waste being properly recycled. And then the remainder is going to be incinerated, landfilled, or dumped in the environment, which of course leads to toxic chemicals contaminating the soil, the water, and the air we breathe. Of course, the loss of valuable resources, as I mentioned earlier, copper, gold, silver, these are all part of the electronics that we are creating today. Greenhouse gases, of course, those are emissions from the production and disposal of our waste. So, the new tech revolution, driven by the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies, it's transforming the way we live and the way we work. But that rapid transformation is also resulting in a staggering amount of electronic waste. I don't know if you saw that Tesla introduced its new robotics, Optimus, just last week, along with more electronic cars, an electronic van, very exciting, very modernistic tools. However, how are we going to manage e-waste of robots? What happens if I don't want to use my robot anymore? I want to get a new one or upgrade. Does Tesla take it back? Do I just put it out on the curb for the local waste recycling to pick it up? I don't know. And
Mhm,
neither do many of your audience members. And I
mhm,
think that's what we have to talk about today. Not just what private sector is doing, but also what a country's doing. If we look up the kind of biggest polluters, if we can call them that, the
mhm,
United States is on the list, China, India, these are big countries because they're polluters, not just because they want to be polluters, but because they have big populations,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Top three populations in the world. And so if we look at the numbers around those populations, then we have to put responsibility with those governments as well. I mentioned earlier that to address any problem, we need a multifaceted approach, but we also need a collaborative approach where consumers have responsibility. It's nice if each of us individually are taking responsibility and trying to make appropriate choices to support sustainability. But we can't do it all. And our impact is different than the impact a government or a country would have, right? So places like India has introduced an e-waste management rule back in 2023. It said, look, the country's got to reduce its e-waste, or at least the process of properly disposing of electronic waste has to be regulated.
mhm.
So they came up with an e-waste management plan. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and dispose are the four pillars of that e-waste management plan. China has a very ambitious goal to recycle half of its electronic waste by 2025. And of course, with such a huge population, they're expected to have 6 billion used mobile phones by that date. And e waste has really emerged as the fastest growing waste stream, not only in that country, but in others. And in the US, the Environmental Protection Agency also has been encouraging the recycling, particularly of laptops, because there are millions of them in the US, and that saves the energy equivalent to the electricity used by more than 3,500 homes in the US yearly. So there are activities being done in each country, but there are also responsibilities that each of us have.
So now, in your introduction, when I was saying that you, in your current role as Assistant Director for Procurement, Contracts, and Travel Missions at Interpol, right? When I first read the word missions, Mission Impossible came to my mind. People out there jumping out of planes and doing things like that. But you explained to me something that I did not understand, that Interpol is involved in missions having to do with procurement and exactly what you just said, that life cycle of different products. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think what you just talked about, what countries are doing with recycling programs, is under that umbrella of missions.
Sure. A mission really normally is travel related to an economic and social development goal, typically. And it's a term used a lot in international governmental organizations, not well known outside of that sphere, but it is properly used in those spaces. So, yeah, that's what a mission is. There's also another connotation, as you said, people are kind of jumping out of planes of Mission Impossible. I won't say that's not true. I will simply say that that is a part of what missions are.
It's not all Tom Cruise and his team of tech people here. All right. So when you talked about what China is doing, which is amazing, India, the United States, some of the countries that have the biggest share in the potential e-waste. So when you think about what needs to happen, that's what we're doing from a country perspective. What do you think are the responsibilities of a business? The businesses that are creating this e-waste, like you said, Tesla and this introduction of new technologies. What is a company like Tesla's responsibility to help us as individuals do better when it comes to getting rid of our new Tesla robot?
Look, I think that Tesla, like many organizations, is taking sustainability very, very seriously. And also, frankly, there's an economic component to sustainability. Being able to reuse the materials that went into new products, get consumers to bring them back and then recycle them and repurpose them is actually a benefit to the company. It saves billions of dollars potentially over certain lifespans of products because you're able not to have to go source new goods to be able to create new products, but rather to use existing goods or existing components to create new products. So there's always an economic to that as well. I think that you asked the question, what are companies doing? I think companies are doing a lot, but first we've got to acknowledge that we've got to control our urge to constantly upgrade. I think that's one thing that companies are counting on. And that's why they invest in programmed obsolescence.
Mhm.
Basically, for those who are not familiar with that, it means products are designed to have a limited lifespan to keep us buying new things. I'm not sure that that is the way all companies are going, but many companies have indeed done that. Have you noticed how you may have a second generation iPad and then you go to update the software and it says, oh, sorry, this iPad is not meant to have an upgrade with the software. So then you're in a position where you can't even use it, even if you wanted to just keep upgrading. I think there's a lot of different things happening in the global corporate space to invest in a multifaceted approach and solution to management of waste. And those include circularity. I'll talk about that in a moment. Recycling, yes. Education and awareness. And of course, other aspects that incentivize clients and consumers to act responsibly in their consumption.
Okay.
But Simone, you asked me something earlier. You asked me about different types of waste that are affecting our planet and how and what we can do about that. And I'd like to, if you don't mind, speak a little bit to kind of two other big areas of waste that consumers need to be mindful of if conscious and caring about our planet and our environment. And those are food waste and retail waste,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Big
Food
areas, big
waste is
areas. Think about the cruise ships. You go on a cruise ship, think about buffets.
absolutely.
We throw out tons and tons of food per year, and it's a big problem in the
Yes.
United States and I'm sure other areas. And I definitely talked about these fast fashion brands that have clothing that people throw out after just one or two wears. And where
Yep.
does all of that end up? For instance, everyone listening, if you wanted to clean out your closet right now, and there were some things that were in great shape and you wanted to donate. But what about the things that are not in good shape? They're stained or torn or just not in a shape that people will want to use. What do you do with those things? How can you recycle them? I will say, Magda, that I've seen times when there's been recyclers that will use clothing to make new rugs. They will use plastic bottles, waste from plastic bottles to make different things. Maybe artificial turf is one of those things. And obviously, we have recycling of paper and plastics into different things, but you don't really see a lot of things having to do with recycling of clothes. What about food? I know that we've got food banks. I know that sometimes there's some things that you can use with farm animals, but I don't know that these things are well ingrained in our society, that we as individuals really know on a regular basis what to do with these things. So please share with us some things that we can do to take a more active role in this idea of not drowning in our beautiful garbage.
I think you're right. Those are very good observations. The first thing is to, as I said earlier, you always need to understand exactly the scale of the problem. So, for example, for food waste, it's often overlooked despite being a major environmental issue because, in fact, people associate it more with an ethical issue than an environmental issue, an ethical issue related to hunger. But there are environmental consequences to food waste. Globally, about a third of all food produced for human consumption is wasted. And the amounts that we see in the US, for example, 30 to 40% of the food supply is thrown away. The average American individual wastes approximately 220 pounds of food annually. That's a whole lot of waste. And while food waste is often seen as primarily an ethical issue, the environmental consequences are very concerning. They have a profound impact on the ecological system and the climate. For example, greenhouse gas emissions from food waste, it's not just the food itself that's lost, it's everything that went into producing, packaging, transporting the food
Right.
that's also lost, you see? And when that food ends up in landfills, there's a staggering release of greenhouse gases. You've also got agriculture's carbon footprint on food. That's food that's never even eaten. You have farming, harvesting, processing food. It requires an amount of energy and water and land that is enormous. And so throwing away food waste, all of these inputs, and food waste directly ties back to increased land use, deforestation, and energy use in agriculture. Then finally, I think even though water and land are kind of part of agriculture, agriculture is the largest consumer of fresh water resources in the world, accounting for around 70% of global water withdrawals. So when we waste food, we're also wasting the precious water, the precious land, and the precious energy that was used to grow it, process it, and deliver it. That's a huge problem because all of these items, water, land, energy, are becoming more scarce.
So what do we do?
I think there are a lot of things that we can do. First of all, I think addressing food waste is not just about reducing the environmental and economic damage. It's also about creating a kind of more just and sustainable global food system. Number one, reducing food waste at the source. Food farming plans are important. You don't just source as much as you can. You need to leave some for the rest. So food farming plans that address reasonable needs of the communities that are around the farmers first, and then partnerships with business and local agencies, incentivized by tax breaks, by zero interest loans, by subsidies. Those are things that we don't like to hear, particularly if we believe the government should be less involved in our lives and than they are. But in reality, you need government to take those actions. Of course, donating surplus food is also something. If you have excess food, donate to local food banks or organizations. In the US, there's a law called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, and that will shield donors from any liability should they be sued because they're afraid of donating food. A lot of people are afraid
Wow.
about that. Don't be. There's an act that shields you. Also, feeding livestock with food scraps. I know there's a big vegan and vegetarian movement, but livestock need grains, need meats, need other types of food. So food that may not be safe for human consumption can still be used as animal feed. And then, of course, educate and standardize. One of the largest misconceptions that lead to household food waste, for example, is confusion over expiration dates. Many people throw out what is perfectly good food because they've misinterpreted best buy
Right.
or sell by dates. That's different. And manufacturers need to do a better job of making sure that there's standardization across how they label food. And governments and companies can help by helping to standardize those labels as well through legislation or through their own initiatives. And then finally, I would say for food waste, support food redistribution programs. What that means. In France, where I am, laws have been passed requiring supermarkets to donate unsold food rather than throw it away. And I think similar laws could be implemented in other countries, reducing the environmental impact of food waste and feeding those in need. On retail, I have more to say, but I'll take a break there and let you ask anything you'd like. So,
Well, you've said a lot and really are doing a great job of just educating even me on some of the things that have been happening or in some of the things that could be happening with giving legislation, given governmental regulation, and also just given ESG strategies that corporations should be developing around waste management, whether that's tech waste, retail waste, food waste. Those three things alone will cover most of the different corporations. And this is something that we just need to focus on as a thing because it's getting worse as our land mass gets more and more crowded by either livestock or people. And then we have more and more impact of global warming and all of the bad things that come along with that, more storms and more natural disasters. So again, this whole tech waste thing, we're having this conversation because it is timely, it is important, and it does definitely relate back to what's happening in this new era of AI and how everything gets tied together in terms of how we live on this one little blue ball that we are trying to maintain not only for ourselves, but for our families. So you talked about some actions that we could take in terms of sustainability. Is there a way that some things that you can give us to easily remember or keep these resources in our minds or these actions that we can take in our mind, Magda?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and I can break it down by what individuals can do, what businesses can do, what governments can do. But first, I'll start just with a little tip that I gave earlier. I said, number one, let's acknowledge that we have an urge to constantly upgrade, and we need to pull on that urge and control it. Second, we need to eliminate programmed obsolescence. That's been something that companies have been doing for years, and we've got to get rid of that. And people are pushing back against that so that basically products are not just designed to have a limited lifespan, but so that we can keep buying, but can actually last longer. Third, I don't know if you've heard about the right to repair movement. Have you?
No, I have not. Do tell.
Well, it's about giving people the right to fix their own stuff. Right now, for example, companies make it difficult to get repair manuals. You'll notice that. The right tools or even just sometimes parts. Yeah, let's say your refrigerator, you only have one part that you need replaced. How do you get that part replaced? Do you even have a manual to identify anything about the refrigerator parts? No. You have to go look for that. Doesn't come from the manufacturer anymore. Those are subcontracted out along the supply chain. So somebody else is selling parts. So with the right to repair movement, it's about giving people the right to have access to repair manuals, the right tools, and sometimes the parts they need so that they can fix things themselves. And this movement wants to change that. There's even a website called iFixit that kind of supports that. They've got awesome teardown guides for pretty much any gadget that you can imagine. And it's the ultimate DIY resource for tech.
So hold on a second now. I remember seeing something recently that, let's say, one of the biggest cell phone manufacturers no longer sends the manual with the new phones. I saw that and I thought, oh, okay, well, probably a lot of people just have their manual sitting in their home in the box and they never took it out. They don't do anything with it. And so they decided, hey, why are we spending money on sending this manual? Why not just give them something where they can go online and find the manual should they need to do so? What about that? That seems like a good way to, reduce the paper usage, reduce waste. People are not going to use the manuals. If they wanted, they can go online. Well, what about that? That seems like the right thing to do.
I agree. And many companies are taking the right actions, and making manuals available online is one of them. But they need to say that in the packaging that although we're not including the manual, please look online. You have free access to it on our website. Having people guess that the manual is there or making it difficult to find the parts numbers or that the manual itself is something that some retailers or manufacturers play with. And we need to push back against that. And that's what sustainability evangelists do. They push back against making goods obsolete before their time because there's no way for us to repair, reuse, recycle, or repurpose them.
Wow, I will tell you, well, I guess it's something I didn't really think a lot about, and that's probably just because of how I think, because I'll give you an example. So my daughter had a computer that was getting very slow, but still wasn't old. It's just that it didn't have a lot of memory when we initially bought it because she was very young and she didn't really need a whole lot at that time. So my husband was like, okay, well, let's get a new one. And I thought, wait, no, pause. All we need to do is upgrade the memory. So what I
That's
did
right.
is I went online and I found the DDR, the RAM that you basically can take out of the motherboard and pop in one that is a higher rated in terms of speed and storage capacity. So I went with my screwdriver, I took the back off that laptop and did all of that and put it in. She's looking at me like, okay, I can't believe you're doing this. And I'm just thinking, well, why wouldn't I? Right. But again, folks, remember, I'm an engineer. So these are the kind of things that I know it's available. But most people would not do that. They would not attempt. They would
That's
just
true.
basically toss a laptop and buy a brand new one. Right.
You're
So
absolutely right, Simone. And so bravo to you, because what are some things that people might not even realize they can do to squeeze a little bit more life out of their old devices? Well, a good place to start is what you just mentioned, upgrades to memory and software upgrades. Sometimes all it takes to give an old gadget a boost is updating the operating system or some key apps. And
yeah.
that's what you did.
Now let's also remember that by taking the back off that laptop, I also voided the warranty. Caution, right? Yes. So because some people might do that and have absolutely no idea what they're doing and mess it up even worse, right? So it was again a laptop that I knew for me was expendable because it was a small laptop for a child at the time. It was okay. I'm not gonna do that with my $2,000 like Mac Air or something like that. But and as a matter of fact, you can't even take the back off those computers.
No,
You
you
need
can't.
specialized
But
tools.
you did, yeah, but you did your research. And I think that's what it's about. It's before you hit that download button, take a minute to look up some independent reviews of the software update. See what other users are saying, whether it's actually improved or made things better or it's more trouble than it's worth, like trying to take off the battery and losing the warranty. Those are important points. But data security is also definitely a crucial issue.
Let's talk about that some more.
That's right.
Before you recycle that laptop or the cell phone, please tell everybody what they should do to clear off their private information.
Absolutely. Data security is definitely crucial, and it's a relatively easy thing to address. I think before you even think about selling or giving away any device, do a factory reset. Make sure, absolutely, that all your personal data is wiped clean. It's like hitting the reset button on your entire digital life, right? And there are tons of tutorials online that walk you through the process
Absolutely.
step by step so you can be extra confident that nothing's sticking around before you give it away
Yes, and
or
now if you're
recycle it.
giving it away and you think that it's still in good enough shape to be recycled, there are some companies that will take those, like mentioned, like Best Buy. There's a bin like literally in front of the stores, and they will sometimes refurbish them and send them to other countries that may be able to use these devices. Now, if you realize it's not in a shape to be recycled or reused, I know some people will have a little bit of fun with their device and like get a drill out and like drive the drill through their motherboard just to make sure that there's no way that you're going to get any information off of that. There's an old movie that I love called Office Space. And in that movie, there's a scene where they have a printer that's problematic in the office.
Oh,
And
I know that movie.
yes, and towards the end of the movie, they take the printer out to this empty field and they beat the crap out of that printer. They had a little bit of fun. Wear your safety goggles, kids, if you're going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Simone, you mentioned right before that, you said, what about some smaller electronics for e-waste? And can we drop them off at Best Buy or Staples or something like that? Many of these stores now do have these drop off bins for things like old phones, batteries, cables, that sort of thing. It's a great option for smaller items and usually pretty convenient too. And I think that's one of the most important things private sector can do. Make it convenient for consumers to recycle, repurpose, and reuse. And there isn't enough activity going on in that area. You even mentioned, you talked a little bit earlier about clothes and purposing and recycling. Now, some of the fast fashion brands, they've gotten now into returning. You have a whole section on their website to return the clothes. They'll even pay you a small fraction of what you paid originally or what the clothes are now worth. Or simply, if you want to get rid of it, but in a sustainable way, you can give it back to them. Remember, they're going to reuse those components. Some people might say, well, why am I supporting their business model? I've already paid for it once and then they're going to use it again for free and redo it. Well, you're saving the planet. So think of it that way. Yes, they're recycling and they're reusing something that you've bought, but instead of creating and sort of sucking out more resources to recreate those fabulous fashions, they're using the old ones. I didn't get to tell you that in your audience that much of the retail economy now is really moving into what's called the circular economy to address the environmental burden of retail waste. And I think that circular economy is where the life cycle of products is extended through repair, reuse, recycling, and upcycling has now become trendy. So you've got clothing rental services like Poshmark, exactly, Rent the Runway. You've got secondhand online markets like Poshmark, Depop, ThreadUp. You also have upcycling and repair. Many of the companies offer clothing recycling and repair services. Brands like Patagonia, fast fashion brands like Zara, even H&M, they're offering return boxes in their stores. And recently, I have to share this one with you and with your audience. Never was I more shocked. I went into a major retail shoe store recently, and they are offering rental of shoes. You can rent the shoes on a monthly basis. You can rent the shoe for up to 30 days for a flat fee. You bring it back in good condition, and then you can just rent another pair instead of buying. Now, that's not for everybody, I understand. But if you're a sustainability evangelist, that's an option that you can consider.
Well, this has been very, very informative. And when you talk about the recycling of clothes, and I'm so thrilled to see that these retailers are putting these return boxes, because from a consumer perspective, it's great. You get to use something and then bring it back and get, if you are able to get some sort of discount or credit for the things that you bought, what do you think you're going to do? You're going to go and you're going to buy something else. The minute you
Buy
drop off
something
the
else.
jacket that you're no longer wearing, you're going to buy something else in that same store with that $20 credit that you just got, or a $10 credit, depending on what it is that it is. And I think that's great because you also get to make space in your closet. Because I don't know about you, Magda, but I definitely need more space in my closet.
We all need more space in our closets.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Magda, for joining me today on the 10X Blueprint podcast and talking about how we can stop drowning under our beautiful garbage and look at these sustainability options for our food waste, our tech waste, and our retail waste, and really basically save the planet. So I appreciate that. So if people want to learn more about you or learn more about what you're writing about with tech waste and the different types of waste and what we can do, where can they find you?
They can follow me on LinkedIn, LinkedIn/IN/M Theodate, or they can follow me on X at Global Exec Trade. It would be a pleasure to talk about practical steps that all of us can take to find a multifaceted solution to sustainability.
All right, fantastic. All right, everyone, until next week, talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us on the 10X Blueprint podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring and want to stay ahead of the curve on the latest trends in AI, AR, and Web3, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube at Brandiverse Marketing. Together, we'll unlock the blueprint for 10X growth. Don't miss out on our next episode, and until then, onward and upward.